So welcome to the business meeting of December 9th, 2021. We are reconvening after being in executive session, and I'd like to open the meeting with a pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, the first item on our agenda is public comment on agenda items. I would like to say that while the board has historically provided great leeway regarding the 3-minute time limit for public comments, in the event that the speaker is sharing hateful, hurtful, judgmental, inaccurate, or otherwise inappropriate comments, no such extension of time will be allowed. The board wants to hear from the community. We want to hear specifically about your child's experiences, and how we can improve them. So, with that being said, do we have anybody that would like to speak on the listed agenda items? No? Okay. The treasurer's report for August 2021 is available in the business office. So I'd like a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Resolved to approve the consent agenda items 2 through 11 as presented to the board at this meeting.
Second.
Questions or comments? Maureen?
Hi, tonight's consent agenda includes approval of minutes of the last board meeting, placements for the CSE, CPSE, which comes out of the PPS department, approval of updates to the 2021-22 substitute listing, additional work hours for various staff members, approved to dispose of certain district items. These are art molds from the high school art department, which have had no use in the district for many years. There's an approval of a revised substitute salary schedule, which will be in effect January 1st, 2022, and we will have those revised rates on the website beginning on January 1st. We're approving an unpaid leave of absence for a staff member. We're amending a probationary date due to an error in the original approval. We're accepting a donation from Mr. and Mrs. Fryer, which is an instrument, a trombone, and a music stand to be used at the elementary school, and we thank them for their donation. And it's approval of a standard workday resolution for certain appointed officials, which is a requirement from New York State. And that's it.
Thank you. Questions or comments on what Maureen had to say? Anybody? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Resolution passes. So we're going to begin our presentations today. Our first presentation is with Cume Partners. There are internal auditors, and they have done a risk assessment, and they're going to report on that.
So welcome Ms. Sharon Eason, Manager of Commercial Practice from Cume Partners. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you. Our risk assessment includes a district-wide analysis of the major district functions, processes, and controls. We consider the qualitative and quantitative factors such as materiality to the financial statements, policies and procedures, strategic planning, and organizational change. In addition, the risk assessment includes a quantitative risk rating that represents an aggregate assessment of risk relative to the financial and operating environment, the information technology, governance, internal controls, and compliance factors. Our overall goal was determined to the degree of risk within the major functional areas of the district operations. Internal audit does not strictly recommend auditing only the functional areas with the highest risk rating score. Other factors affecting the recommendation include board management, priorities, limited resources, prior audit results, the opportunity for a greater impact of adding value to the organization, and the degree of the organizational change in the functional areas. All of these factors are addressed when devising the recommended audit plan. The definition of risk assessment is on the screen, and I'll speak a little more to that. Some factors will affect the overall risk rating more than others. In other words, the financial significance, materiality, or criticality of a particular function to the organization's operations can increase the risk rating of a function. For example, if payroll and purchasing, the rating score for most districts will be relatively higher than other areas because of the financial significance or materiality of these operations. This explains that some areas, when the district may have higher inherent risk associated with them relative to other operations. Another factor that can increase the risk rating is the design of the internal controls. If the district was lacking in key controls over a functional area, such as adequate segregation of duties or policies and procedures, that would create more of a risk. The ultimate goal is to effectively manage the risk in all functional areas through the implementation of a system of internal controls that helps to ensure that errors, irregularities, and fraud are less likely or to go undetected. In performing our risk assessment, we categorize the district into functional areas. We then utilize a rating methodology that takes into account quantitative and qualitative factors such as the policies and procedures, the financial materiality, operational change, employee knowledge and training, internal controls, management reporting, and of course the laws and the regulations. The factors were individually weighted by relevance and importance. Then a risk matrix was developed to compromise of the factors across all functional areas. The composite rating score are a level as follows. Low rating is less than 131 in the score. The medium rating is between 131 and 210. And high rating is between 211 and 300. On this slide, the visual rating we show the visual rating as a fiscal year over year. The recommendation this year, based on the risk assessment that we did, is to look at human resources and payroll. We met with the audit committee previous to this meeting, and they also are in agreement with that. And as of note from the slide before, the last time an audit was done on human resources and payroll was 2015-2016. Any questions? None. I thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I would like to take this opportunity to invite out Mr. Tom Sawyer as the chairperson of the audit committee. Thanks, Tom.
Everyone, good evening. Thank you. Not really a whole lot to add to that. I don't know if there's any questions. The audit committee would follow that recommendation for auditing the human resources and payroll. Any questions, comments?
I don't have a question, but I do have a congratulations. I do want to recognize the efforts of Ms. Jill Figuerella and all the members of our business office. Obviously, the ratings are all very well, which means we're doing an excellent job in making sure that the public's money is carefully cared for. So I want to commend all of them. I also want to commend Sharon for that is a lot of work and information squeezed into 6 slides, which I think is the most impressive presentation I've seen in a long time. So thank you all.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
And as long as we're talking about money, the next presentation is Jill Figuerella on the financial forecast of the district.
Isn't it bigger?
Good evening. Can I remove this while I'm talking or no?
You do it?
Can I remove this while I'm talking or no?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Good evening. Jill Figuerella, business official for the school district. Tonight, I'm here to talk about our multi-year financial planning process. So the district has begun to start the process for the budget for 2022-23, and we're starting to meet with different leaders of different departments to incorporate their budget information into our budget presentations, which will be upcoming tonight. I think we're adopting the budget timeline if possible, and this is really an quick overview of how we look at financial planning as we go forward, because we can't just look at the current year, we need to look forward at years coming to understand where we are and where we need to get to, and so forth. So for financial planning to start out, we usually try to identify what our priorities are. We make program and financial recommendations, or the building principals make recommendations to myself and the superintendent and what they'd like to see happen, our curriculum director, our special ed director, and so forth, and what their needs are going to be in all the individual departments. And we build our budget around those district goals and their needs. So there are a lot of factors that obviously affect our financial condition, and these are three of the main things that not just myself, but these are three of the main things that would affect our financial condition. And one is, I'm just going to go into a little bit of explanation of each one. Our organizational factors would be things such as our current leaders, our culture of the district, our vision and mission and goals of the district. There are a lot of environmental factors that affect our financial condition. For instance, housing markets, inflation facts, student needs, our population, like what is our enrollment going to be in the next few years, and income levels of residents. A lot of that meaning like wealth factors. So wealth factors have a lot to do with the state aid that we get. So the fiscal factors that affect our financial condition, of course, would be the state aid that the district gets, which is about 20% of our revenues, the rest coming from local taxes, and the tax cap calculation. Again, that presents itself and presents the levy at some point to feed into our financial condition, what kind of spending habits we have, our policies, district policies, and of course mandates that we are given by New York State and how we fit those into our budget as well. So the school district, is always planning and trying to provide the most equitable education we can within the means of our budget. We have to take into consideration safety and security of our students' learning environment, such as the campus security, maintaining our facilities. Sometimes those things are outliers. We look at the education and the program pieces, but we have to remember there's the facilities and other types of things that we don't necessarily recognize as part of education plan, but they are. And does our educational plan provide for professional development for our teaching and non-teaching staff? And how are we meeting the state mandates, and how are we remaining under the tax cap, having to meet those state mandates, right? So there are a lot of mandates that we have to fit into our budget that can sometimes force our budget to be higher than we expect it to be, only because we're mandated to do certain things. So, and how, like the New York State tax cap, how is that going to help us get to our budgetary needs? And do we have to supplement that with fund balance? And how do we communicate that with our voters? And how do we get them to come out to vote? And so forth. How do we get our program concerns addressed when we have to meet the tax cap? So these are our major financial planning priorities, and in the area of expenses. So what do we know right now, and what are those big ticket items, right? So we have our instructional salaries for our staffing. Right now, our teacher's contract is in negotiations, due to be negotiated by the end of June. Hopefully we know some more information about that soon, so that can help us develop our budget. We have healthcare costs, and right now I think all areas of business and private, public sectors are, seeing increasing costs there. Pension costs, you might see them going up or down. For non-teaching and teaching expenditures, that's the biggest part of our budget is our salaries. It's about half of our budget. Capital upkeep and expenditures that we're anticipating. A lot of times we forget, we have to remember to look at what are those replacement costs of classroom furniture. What are our paving needs, our field work, our fencing needs, our operations and maintenance needs for machinery and vehicles, our HVAC replacement units in all of the buildings. I can tell you they run about $7,000 or $8,000 a piece for each unit. And there are many units throughout the building. Some of our larger units are over $30,000 a piece. Athletic equipment, things that don't necessarily need to be replaced, every year or every 5 years, but they need to be replaced. And funding plans for these types of items on a gradual basis really lets us project and have continuous general operating expenses. It doesn't interfere with our programmatic budgeting. And then we have our revenues, and we need to know where that money comes from. Again, as I mentioned earlier, 20% of our state aid and local revenue is being generated to keep us under the tax cap, but 80% of taxes, 80% comes from taxes and the use of our reserves. So I spoke a little bit about capital planning in the previous slide, and I want to emphasize that a little bit more going forward. So recommended by the State Comptroller's Office, and if anyone would like to see the guidance on that, I did include a link here where you can go and look at that publication, what their recommendations are for school districts in general. And it includes identifying and prioritizing a list of capital assets that need to be replaced at some point in time. Establishing an informal plan. We're a small district. I don't think a formal plan is necessary. Some of the larger districts with, 5, 6, 7, 8 and plus buildings, need to have a more formal type of plan. And within their budgets to include a transfer to the capital fund each year so that we can replace those assets on a sustainable but rotating schedule. So we're not just at the end of the year maybe taking some remaining funds from our appropriations and using them to buy this or that or 10 of these, and it keeps us on a better cycle if we plan for those things ahead. It helps us set budgetary goals to meet significant financial responsibilities without overburdening our taxpayers in any particular year, and avoids long-term financing or inhibiting programs so that we have a gradual funding stream instead of an influx all at once. Again, I'm going to stress we need to predict the sustainability of programs and the development of future programs that promote achievement. We identify where those potential shortfalls could be. We determine if we have existing revenue streams that are sufficient, and if not, where can we get that revenue from? Are there grant programs that we can reach out to and apply for? Are there things that we can do to try to generate some revenue? And what can we do to implement the change in order to do that? we have to keep monitoring our aid projections, our fund balances, and our expenses. So from last year to this year, there's many assumptions that have changed, but these are some of the key ones. Our environmental changes, of course, due to the pandemic and what our needs are going forward as far as health concerns go. Federal stimulus aid, we are still waiting for approval on parts of that program that are being granted to the school. And again, I want to reiterate that we should not be using those funds for unsustainable expenditures, because once we start doing that, we can no longer continue to do those things once that money is used up. It is not part of our operating budget. It is a separate amount of money. Of course, another assumption should be that inflation trends threaten affordability for us. For example, interest rates, bond ratings, and obviously politics at the state and federal level. So some of the unintended consequences that we have from all of this are every year different consequences, but we have some favorable ones and unfavorable ones, of course. So as far as our favorable things go, we have unexpended budget lines, for instance, due to the school closures. So that created an increase in our fund balance this past year. We've had property tax collections that were not affected in the current year, so I'm happy to report that. We are going to have, as of right now, I think 7 staff retirements, so that'll create some savings. That can change. There could be 1 or 2 more. And of course, improved technology integration for content delivery was created over this time period. Unfavorably, we have to figure out how we can boost student learning as we recover from the time lost in the classroom. We have an economic outlook that threatens investment earnings. Again, I'll mention that. Our revenues from interest earnings alone are down $100,000. And it also drove some pension rates up, and of course, because there's an uptick in retirement statewide, a lot of people are choosing to leave their profession and move on to other things. So we're seeing a lot of that. Costs for, of course, PPE equipment, additional staff to cover increased building needs, monitors, teacher assistants, teacher aides, additional technology support and equipment, and a lot of time spent on required tracing and health guidance by our own staff. So here are some forecast assumptions for 22-23. Currently, and we do not know a lot of information that's going into the budget yet, but we know some. So my anticipated budget change right now, as it stands, not knowing a lot of the information, is a budget-to-budget change of 1.56%. The tax levy, again, this is driven by a formula. So the formula includes the CPI. A CPI is our consumer price index. It is a rate of inflation that we would have to factor into the tax levy. That right now is at 0.5. It's probably going to change. I won't know that for another month. But that being said, if it were to remain at 0.5 and our budget to budget remains at 1.56, the tax levy would be approximately a 1.32% change. Now, again, all those figures can change and shift somewhat in one direction or another, so cannot hold me to that information. It's just an estimate at this point. The 21-22 state aid was, as far as revenues go, it was restored. We will continue to see restoration of foundation aid, supposedly. There's a question mark there. But again, we won't know that for another month. In January, the legislative budget comes out, and we will have a better idea about the aid then. Again, federal stimulus funds, of course, became available, and we're waiting for approval. I'm going to repeat, they should not be used for unsustainable expenditures. That is not the way that we should think about using them. Expenditure changes, we're going to see, we have health insurance rate increases of 6%. We know that. That is something I do know right now. For our district, that's about $450,000. Teacher and CSEA pensions, those are changing. The teacher's pension rate is not going up very much, 9.53 to 9.8. And the employees' retirement system, which is the non-teaching staff, is actually dropping from 6.2% to 11.6%. A big change in that rate. However, the salary base for that particular unit is one quarter of what the TRS rate is. So the savings there, although there is some, is not as significant as the teacher's payroll. Social Security taxes are fixed at 7.65% on all salaries, so with natural increases, that will increase. Again, our administrators union and the CSEA contracts are in effect, and they are settled as of right now, but the teacher's contract is currently in negotiations. So looking at our reserves, because when we get all of our revenues and we get all of our expenses, the way that we come to balance the both of those is through the use of reserves if we have them. So we are including in this year's budget, we will be the use of our debt reserve in combination with our general operating reserves in order to balance that budget. The amount is dependent on, of course, changing state aid, which I'll know in another month, and the CPI, and any revenue or actual appropriations that are remaining at the end of this fiscal year. So right now, we're only about halfway through. We won't know, we'll have a better picture of that, let's say, in the next 60 days, where we may end up at the end of this year. And again, it's very preliminary, so. So the considerations that we need to the things that we need to take into consideration are always the possibility of state aid cuts that could be on the horizon. Our pension contribution rates are known as of right now. What we don't know is what the final salaries are going to be for the teacher's contract. But again, next year, this is a multi-year financial plan that we're thinking about, right? So it's not just for the coming year. So will the economy bounce back? How much? That will affect our pension rates. Possible impact, any inflation will have an impact on the district's bond ratings, and that can, change the cost of borrowing funds. We're going to be bonding the project that we just completed, so that'll be happening in July. So hopefully we'll see a good rate on that. We need to bolster those capital funds for future infrastructure needs that I talked about earlier. New economic realities. What does the job market look like? What are sales tax revenues? How is inflation and housing? And the ability to protect the taxpayers' investment in education and provide equity while trying to close those achievement gaps. That's what our reserves may help us do, some of these things, because we need to, again, close that gap between the expenses and the revenues, usually in our budgets from year to year. Okay. So some of additional considerations are, how do we avoid exceeding the tax cap? How do we provide strong educational programs while maintaining fiscal solvency and responsibility to the community we serve, right? We want to be able to check off this list, right? We want to be able to successfully negotiate the bargaining unit contract and make changes in there that are favorable, programmatic changes when necessary. We want to be able to review our class size and enrollment from year to year, know where we stand with that. Unfortunately, we don't know where we stand with enrollment sometimes right up until the end of August. We start collecting that information and registering children, I think, in February, or we're registering them all the time, but we go right up until August before we know what our final counts are, especially for kindergarten. we have to be able to check off the box that we're renegotiating vendor contracts on time. We have our school lunch contract expiring this June, so that's, we're beginning work on that now. And how much use of fund balance are we using? And when we use fund balance, I'd like to mention, it's something that definitely mitigates the additional local tax burden, and I don't know that a lot of people understand that, but when we have leftover funds at the end of a fiscal year, either revenues or expenditures that weren't spent, and they go into a reserve, when we build our budget the following year and we use some of those reserves towards the balancing of the budget, we are reducing the burden of adding taxes onto the tax levy. In other words, we're using money that's already been received, and we're putting those towards next year's budget. I don't know why this is doing this. Okay, so a goal overall, find a balance to support the district's educational vision while closely managing district finances and remaining fiscally responsible to the taxpayer, weighing all those costs against the benefits of what we're doing. And this is my information where you can find me if you have questions or anything that you want to talk about financially or fiscally or about the budget or many different topics. Does anyone have any questions about any of this?
Jill, you mentioned, and I just want to have this say it out loud, you mentioned federal funds cannot be used for unsustainable expenditures. Can federal funds reduce the state aid?
I'm sorry, can federal fund?
Reduce the state aid?
So federal funds cannot reduce the state aid, no. Federal funds are a separate bucket of funds that the district gets to use towards whatever the criteria is that they tell us we can use it for.
I mean, the umbrella for the federal funds is really about recovery for lost instruction, safer building spaces, really all pandemic-related expenditures that schools maybe have endured or can continue to endure to help get the students through this pandemic and back to some sense of normalcy. So it's obviously much more detailed in terms of what buckets you can use that money in, but in general sense, it's meant to support academic programs and capital improvements related to pandemic instruction.
We can't take that money and use it to lower a tax levy or anything like that. It's just, it can reduce the burden on taxpayers because we now do not have to take those expenditures that we need to use on capital expenditures or loss of learning out of our regular general operating budget. They're allotting this money to use towards that.
Right, so while they can't have a direct impact on the tax levy, they could in fact have an indirect impact on the tax levy by offsetting other expenses.
But Jeanette, you weren't asking, that wasn't your question. You were asking if I'm understanding what you're saying, you're asking if we had this money, does that allow the state to kind of back out of their support of the district by us getting those funds?
That wasn't my question, but that's a good question.
Okay. I thought that's what you were saying.
That's what, at first I thought that's what she was asking. It is additional money. It's not, if we take this, we lose that. No.
And I think the best way to think about the federal stimulus money is it's really a reimbursement. It's not money that was transferred into our general fund that we could then use to offset the tax levy. It's monies that we must first expend on qualified expenses as outlined in our application, and then seek reimbursement for the federal government for those expenses. So if we want to support a summer program, we pay for the summer program and then seek reimbursement for the federal government for that summer program. So it's not money that we have in our bank accounts, it's reimbursements for monies that we've already expended for qualified expenses, which is why it can't simply be used to offset the tax burden, because it's not real money.
Jill, I've heard from some people who have listened and looked at our budget in terms of the fund balance, that it sounds like fund balance is a savings account. And then why should the district have a savings account? But it sounds more like the fund balance is there for, as you manage the budgets effectively, you put in, not knowing what our oil costs are going to be, what our costs are going to be, there may be some money that we didn't spend, in the event that something unexpected happens, to avoid having.
Right, so just to
Can you
simplify
clarify
it,
that
I
a little
think
bit?
at
Thank
the end of every fiscal year, there's always going to be an unspent amount of money that hopefully that we have. And, you know, they become part of our reserves, whether it's revenue or unspent budgetary funds. And there are two types of reserves. There's unassigned and there's assigned reserves. So unassigned reserves just represent the 4% fund balance that we're, by law, can have on an ensuing year's budget. But the assigned amounts are for specific purposes, such as like our capital reserve fund. It can only be used and designated to support, you know, inevitable like future projects that we have, and all those reserves, it can only be used for that. So all the reserves that are assigned are regulated by New York State. So there are reasons that we have those reserves put aside for those reasons, and we can't just give back anything that's left over. We have to reserve it for specific reasons, and then build a budget the following year or in following years to use that money when we need to supplement it.
Right, and I think the implementation of the tax levy cap in New York State makes a reserve, a healthy reserve balance, even more important in the event that CPI comes in really low and we have no ability to levy taxes from the community, or say we had a devastating year and the community is really suffering and the community can't afford any additional levy and taxes. Our expenses for our contractors, our personnel contracts, our health care, all of those other expenses are still going up, regardless of our ability to levy, regardless of how much state aid we receive from New York State. So we need to have some way to offset those expenditures. And what used to be, you would go out to the community and say, we're really sorry, we got shorted on state aid, our health care really went up, we need 8%. We need the community to support 8%. Now, there's a limit for what we can really ask the community to support without seeking a supermajority, which makes availability of those reserves even more important to remain fiscally solvent and to support our community without overtaxing them.
And a good example of that, I talked about earlier, our health cost is going up 6%, $450,000. That's just one item. The difference in the tax levy that I'm expecting this year is like $220,000. So where do we find the other part of that $450 to cover that? Are there things that we can cut? Maybe there's some. Are there things, you know, are there expenses that are going to increase? There are. There's going to be other expenses that increase throughout the budget. Salaries. There's going to be not only salaries, there's vendor increased costs with vendors. And then that causes us to have to dip into those reserves to make those things come together.
Jill, how does our state aid compare to other districts as well as the state?
So in this part of the state, the Hudson Valley, not the lower Hudson Valley, more this part of the, because it's even lower for them, we get about 20% of our revenues from state aid. There are districts in upstate New York who get up to 70% of their, but in this area, it's about 20%.
I think the other side, some are as low as 5, I think I've seen.
Yeah. And down in Westchester, there are many districts who are much lower than us. But yeah, it varies throughout the state. And overall, I think, and as far as the state aid bucket goes, we get about 6% in this region overall throughout the state.
The primary factor is something they called combined wealth ratio.
Right.
And that factor is really the major factor to determine what percentage of that state aid bucket each district receives.
And I know years ago, before I was sitting in this seat, occasionally the district would hold a workshop, not in the formality of a board meeting, to really explain tax levy versus state aid versus, really tax levy and budget to budget increase versus the tax levy. As we get inquiries, or Jill, I know your door is literally always open. Any community member can contact you. But if we look like people really want some answers, could we consider doing that maybe, sometime this year in the spring, having a workshop or a discussion or a coffee or something?
Yep, we used to have, budget meetings and advisory committee. Yep, we've definitely done that in the past. If there was interest, I don't see any reason why we couldn't do that. There's videos, there's things on our website about everything that we do. It's all very transparent. All of our financial reports are up there. But if we wanted to do something that's like more interactive, I would love to go into more detail for that group or that crowd of people that would like to hear about that and how that works.
So just to echo that and to speak on Jill's behalf, we would be willing to meet with any group that is interested in having these conversations, the PTA, the PTSA, any other organization that either wants to come into our office or wants to invite us into theirs. We would be happy to come and sit down and answer any questions and do our best to explain anything or go line by line and really explain what our expenses are. We're totally transparent for how this works, and we would be happy to sit down with anybody who wants to have a better understanding of the budget and the budgeting process.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks for volunteering, Jill.
Anytime.
He just voluntold you.
Any other questions from the board?
Jill, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Jill.
Okay, student representatives, welcome, Leanne. How'd you do? You make me cold looking at
I was
you.
going to say, did you win?
Yes, we did actually.
Very good.
So our languages other than English had their dual inductions on November 30th. So that's Spanish and French honor societies. And then our chorus concerts for the middle school were held in the PAC these past Wednesday and Tuesday for 7th and 8th grade. Our student government had a meeting with the lunch program, Dunkermere and Armark, and it was very productive. Learned a lot and got a lot done. And then we have our holiday toy drive, children's of all ages, run by the NHS, which is donating to Marie Ferrari, and that is being run from November 29th to December 13th. And then winter sports are underway, and girls basketball has had a successful start so far.
Very good. Anything else? Anything else going on? You all enjoyed the snow the other night?
It's a snow day.
Dominic, you want to talk a little bit about the Honor Society thing? I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, so as the treasurer of the Spanish Honor Society, I was able to attend the inductions, and honestly, I believe it is amazing that we have such a large number of students, well over 24, being inducted into both societies, and that a great number of students are very interested in learning and being immersed in other languages and their cultures. And I believe that it's very important for the school to continue to encourage those programs so that we have a better worldview and a more educated populace.
Yeah, it was really impressive, the number of students,
really
both French and Spanish.
And it ran very smoothly.
And Leanne, you mentioned the chorus concerts. I didn't make the 5th and 6th, but the 7th and 8th was incredible. When you figure that they have not, I think they only sang together once before. There are 3 different sections of kids that have never all been together. And the music was complicated, leveled, some amazing soloists. So like all in all, like a really, really terrific job.
Definitely.
So congratulations.
And I love hearing that you all met with Aramark and our food service. Ms. Figueroa, as you start negotiating contract, will you seek the input of our students following these meetings?
Absolutely.
That's great, because they are the ones eating it. So,
Okay, Dr. Luft.
Okay. I want to begin by saying how wonderful it is to see some new faces in the crowd and welcome both new and familiar faces to our board meeting. Recently, myself, Dr. Doherty, and Ms. Levine got to participate in mock interviews with Mr. Baker's class, and I know I've said this before during board meetings, it's definitely one of the highlights of my year. One, I get to leave the office and visit the buildings, but even better is I get to hang out with the kids. So the class, they practice mock interviews, they write resumes and cover letters, and they come in to be interviewed for a job of their choice. The three of us serve as their interviewers and really sort of take them through what it would be like in a real interview scenario, briefly debrief with them individually, and then actually this year, Jackie and I had the opportunity to go back to the classroom on Monday, and we were there for a 60-minute class, and I don't know what he had planned for the class, but we didn't finish in the 60 minutes. It was like rapid-fire questions, students asking, what should have I said here? What did you want to hear for this question? And it was just really a great opportunity to connect with the kids and hopefully give them some real-world skills, so that was fantastic. We had our Aspire celebration, recognizing the student artwork downstairs is always impressive. Anyone who's in the building for athletics can go and see down by the senior lounge all of the previous Aspire drawings hung up. This one is a bunch of individuals. They display no gender, no face, no expressions, but really showing how unity and how they're working together to really hold the weight of the world up. Is probably a terrible description from a non-artist, but it's the best I can do. So I think we had already talked about the Gratitude Festival held here. Unfortunately, we were unable to hold it at the Cultural Center, but we were able to hold it in our band room. As always, amazing performances, current and former students. The house was packed and plenty full of talent. Always a great experience. I was able to bring one of my sons who really enjoyed it. And again, the Lote Honor Society induction, as well as the middle school chorus, where I also attended the 7th and 8th grade chorus and was very impressed. As noted in our previous presentation, it is officially budget season. We've begun holding our preliminary budget meetings with our building principals and department chairs as we begin to build out our 22-23 school budget. Winter sports have begun. I do want to recognize Eva DeChent, who has committed to play basketball at URI next year. Congratulations. We filmed another episode of Inside Putnam Valley Schools, highlighting our elementary school, specifically introduction and welcoming of our new elementary school assistant principal, Jennifer Pico, and recognition of the elementary school's last success on last year's state assessments that placed them in the 96th percentile, or the top 4% of all elementary schools in New York State. So huge congratulations to our administrators, our teachers, support staff, and obviously our elementary school students for a job well done. The next phase of our facilities project, I know it seems a long time ago where this was approved by the voters, but the second phase of the middle school bathrooms is currently out for bid. So if anyone here is a contractor or knows a contractor who is interested in bidding, as long as they promise to give us a really good price and do a really good job, I encourage them to do so. That's out to the public and will be opened in the near future. We had mentioned the consent agenda subpositions. The district continues to struggle, like many in our area, to fill substitute positions. That does include the traditional substitute teacher, but also substitute bus drivers, substitute monitors, substitute cleaners who can come in and work at night. So if anyone's interested, looking to make some extra money, our new rates make us extremely competitive, especially among the schools in our region. It's not a bad gig. You get to come hang out with us. So anyone who out there interested, please take a look. A more detailed document will be available in the minutes, and see exactly what we're offering for individuals who are looking for some part-time work. Unlike many schools in our area, knock on wood, we've had a pretty good run on the COVID front. We have had a couple of cases over the last couple of recent days. I do know there was a bunch of elementary school students quarantined as recently as today. But all in all, we've been in a pretty good place, and I hope to continue so, especially as more and more students become vaccinated. A memo went out to the community offering an opportunity to participate in student surveillance testing. I just want to emphasize this is completely voluntary. New York State requires that we offer student surveillance testing, but there's no threshold, there's no certain percentage of students that we must test. But we do want to offer it for those who are interested in taking advantage. Vaccination status does not matter. I'm sorry. So if you're interested, please take the opportunity to fill out that form so we can get a sense of how many students would be interested in participating. The student vaccination form will be sent out to the community after the holiday recess. For those individuals with students between grades 7 through 12, you've already seen the form. I think we've had almost 400 responses with individuals uploading their vaccination cards. I know some younger students have completed their vaccination series. I'm just hesitant to send it out to the whole community because I don't want many individuals uploading sort of half-completed vaccination cards. So if you're done and you would like to fill it out, we can certainly make it available. It's still out there in the public, but communication will be going out following the New Year's to provide anyone opportunity who wishes to fill in their vaccination information may do so. And obviously the biggest positive of doing that would be if your student is exposed to a positive individual, they would not need to quarantine as long as they remain asymptomatic. So that's the list our school nurses use, and we report that information to the Department of Health. The Department of Health uses that designation to not quarantine individual students who are fully vaccinated. Some upcoming events. We have BOCES Tech. It has their virtual information. Normally they come to the districts and explain their programs, but they are still doing it virtually. So that's taking place on Friday, December 10th. We're doing a bus ride with Senator Serino over the Pudding Street Taconic Bridge. This was previously scheduled a few months back and canceled, so now this is the rescheduled event. We had mentioned the chorus concerts at the middle school this week. Band concerts will be taking place next week, again, all in the high school PAC. Our PV Booster Club is holding the first, probably annual, alumni basketball tournament and fundraiser, and that'll be taking place on Friday, December 17th. We look forward to welcoming back some of our PV alumni, and we're hoping nobody pulls a hamstring. And then some future, well, we'll talk about this later, upcoming presentations, technology and operations is the first two departments to give their budget presentation, followed by athletics and special education on the January meetings. And that's it. Thank you.
And Dr. Luft, that's a very comprehensive report. I don't want to look like I'm nitpicking, but in case she's watching, Ava DeCent is not allowed to go to college next year. She's still a junior, as Leanne pointed out. She committed, but we have her another year. So just wanted to clarify.
I would never get rid of her a year early. My mistake.
I would, Leanne commented, so.
Also, just for the board's information, I didn't realize when I went to the concert last night, so I get to the door and the girl said, you have your ticket? I was like, tickets? You need a ticket? She's like, yes. And I'm like, I don't have a ticket. She's like, I have to speak to Mrs. Cummings. So I guess they're trying to socially distance families and spread them out in the auditorium. So I don't know if that's going to be true for the rest of the concerts, but there should be a way like that, like who should we contact and how do we get it?
Sounds like Susie.
You neglected to tell them that you sat next to the other person who showed up without a ticket or a seat. That was me.
Anybody we know?
So yes, the intention is just to allow families to sort of sit together and create some space between families. That's why we're holding all these concerts in the PAC. It allows them, they're using a ticket system, not that you have to purchase the ticket, but by reserving the tickets, it allows Susie and others to seat families in sort of clusters while providing some space between families from a social distancing standpoint. So I would encourage anyone who plans on attending a future concert to reach out to either the band or choral teacher or directly to the PAC, and we'll make sure to facilitate that. I'll reserve your ticket for you for the next couple.
Okay. Because I know that the high schools is in January, I think. So anyway, just for information. But I'm glad that it was full. It was great to see so many people. Okay, we're moving on to new business. Item number 1, please.
Resolved on the recommendation of the superintendent of schools that Michael Rufo be granted tenure as a teaching assistant in the Putnam Valley Central School District effective January 11th, 2022.
Second.
Questions or comments?
I do want to recognize that Mr. Rufo is with us this evening, looking dapper as always. You could stand up and be recognized.
Let's vote first. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
I abstain.
Resolution passes. Congratulations,
Congratulations.
Michael. You've been our member of our family forever. So this is just another step in your journey. Number 2, please.
Resolved on the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to appoint Nicole Diodana to a 4-year probationary term as a .6 social studies teacher and a .4 special education teacher, commencing on September 1st, 2021, and terminating on August 31st, 2025, in the tenure area of social studies and special education at the high school on Step 3 MA of the PVFT salary schedule. Ms. Diodona holds social studies 7 to 12 and students with disabilities generalist 7 to 12 initial certifications. In order to be eligible for appointment to tenure, said employee must receive at least 3 APPR ratings of effective or highly effective during the 4-year probationary term and may not receive an ineffective rating in the final year of probation.
Second.
Questions or comments?
I just want to point out that Ms. Diodona has provided service to the Putnam Valley School District for several years, first as a part-time basis and now a full-time appointment. So there's no change to that appointment. This is just a resolution capturing the work that she's already performing.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The resolution passes. Number 3, please.
Resolved on the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to appoint Alyssa Himmelfarb to a 4-year probationary term as an ENL teacher commencing on January 3rd of 2022 and terminating on January 2nd of 2026 in the tenure area of ENL at the middle/high school on Step 4 Masters of the Putnam Valley Teacher's Salary Schedule. Ms. Himmelfarb holds ESOL Provisional and ELA 7 through 12 professional certifications. In order to be eligible for an appointment to tenure, said employee must receive at least 3 APPR ratings of effective or highly effective during the 4-year probationary term and may not receive an ineffective rating in the final year of probation.
Second.
Questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The resolution passes. Number 4, please.
Resolved on the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to appoint Megan Cassidy to a 4-year probationary term as a math teacher commencing on January 13, 2022, and terminating on January 12, 2026, in the tenure area of math at the middle school on Step 2 MA of the PVFT salary schedule. Ms. Cassidy holds mathematics 7 through 12 initial certification. In order to be eligible for appointment to tenure, said employee must receive at least 3 APPR ratings of effective or highly effective during the 4-year probationary term and may not receive an ineffective rating in the final year of probation.
Second.
Questions or comments?
We welcome Megan into our district, but she will take in the place of a long-serving math teacher at our middle school, Ms. Pat Vandeveld, who will be retiring in January. So we thank Pat for her many years of service, and we welcome Megan back into the Putnam Valley School District.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The resolution passes. Number 5, please.
Resolved on the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to appoint Melissa Clements to a long-term substitute position as a teaching assistant at the elementary school effective December 6th, 2021, at the substitute rate of $85 per day until certified through on or about March 31st, 2022, or sooner at the discretion of the Board of Education.
Second.
Questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Resolution passes. Number 6, please.
Resolved on the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to accept the resignation for the purpose of retirement of Elizabeth Boscarino, a bus monitor, from the district effective the close of business on June 30th, 2022, as per document number 100/22 attached to the agenda and official minutes of this meeting.
Second.
Questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The resolution passes. Number 7, please.
Resolved on the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to accept the resignation of Mary Bondi, a senior office assistant from the district effective the close of business on November 30th of 2022, as per document number 103/22, attached to the agenda and official minutes of this meeting.
Second.
Questions or comments?
I just want to wish Ms. Bondi and Ms. Boscarino the best, only the best in retirement, and thank them again for their many years of service to our students. Thank you.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Resolution passes. Number 8, please.
Resolved on the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to adopt the 2022-23 budget timeline as per document number 101/22, attached to the agenda and official minutes of the meeting.
Second.
Questions or comments? And when is this going to be published?
Let's
Or is
say
it-
soon after this board meeting?
Oh, okay. So people can find it on the website?
Yes.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Resolution passes.
I first had to warn all the people that we're going to be presenting.
Number 9, please.
Resolved on the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to accept Acumen Partners Risk Assessment Update for fiscal year 2021-22 and the recommended audit plan as per document number 104/22 attached to the agenda and official minutes of this meeting.
Second.
Questions or comments? Tom, she said she was coming back like February, March, right? Is that, like, that's when they're going to actually do the risk assessment? Is that correct?
She said.
Okay, so they assessed what needed to be assessed, then they'll come back and actually look at that.
And
Then
actually
they'll tell us
assess
what
it.
they assessed.
Tell us what they assess. That's right, by June, she said, Sharon said. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The resolution passes. Before I open it up to public comment on any topic, I just want to go through, again, the protocol that we have says that each speaker should state his or her name and address at the podium and is allowed 1 comment with a total speaking time of 3 minutes. All comments should be directed to the whole board and not individual board members or the audience. And while we have provided leeway for the 3-minute time limit for public comment, in the event that the speaker is sharing hateful, hurtful, judgmental, inaccurate, or otherwise inappropriate comments, no such extension of time will be allowed. The board wants to hear from the community. We want to hear specifically about your child and your child's experiences in our schools. Thank you. So I'm opening up to public comment. If anybody would like to, sure, come to the podium, please. Introduce yourself in case we don't know and your address. Please.
Good evening, and thank you. Sam Oliverio, Crescent Lane in Putnam Valley. Just a very short story. Graduating out of Putnam Valley schools back in 1968, I attended Lakeland High School. My junior year, that would be 1969, 1970, I had a great English teacher. His name was Mr. Mahoney, Gerard Mahoney. And he was fantastic. And one of the assignments he gave us during the holiday break was get a book that you've read, fiction, nonfiction, science fiction, didn't matter, and you're going to do a book report on it and present it to the class. Well, I was a big reader, still am, and he said, what you want to do is on an index card, put the name of the book, the editor, hand it in, and one sentence saying why you want to present this book to the class. Next day, I handed my index card in, and towards the end of the class, he gave us some written work or some reading work to do, and he was going through all the cards. And at the end of the class, he said, "Sam, can I see you?" I said, "Sure, Mr. Mahoney, what's up?" And he says, "The book you chose." I said, "Yeah, Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger." And that character, Halden Caulfield, it's me. I mean, when I read that book, that's me. I love it, and I'd like to present it to the class and talk about it. And he said, "Sam, I can't accept it. You got to pick another book." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, I can't. There'll be too much buzz from the community and administration." I said, "Come on, Mr. Mahoney, you got to be kidding me." I said, "This is a great book." He says, "It is a great book, and I'm glad you read it. And I want you to keep reading it throughout your life because you're going to learn more and more each time you read it. But you can't do a book report on that here. There'll be too much pushback. It'll be almost scandalous." And I said, "Are you really?" And he goes, "Sam, I'm sorry, but yeah, pick another book." I liked Mr. Mahoney. I really did. One of my favorite teachers. So I said, "Okay, I'll get another book." Next day, I handed in a card, Profiles in Courage by John F. Kennedy. And I did my book report and turned it in. And when I did the book report in front of the class and gave it to Mr. Mahoney, he gave me an A+ on it. But what I did was to transfer the message of Profiles in Courage to reflect the demeanor and the character of the Lakeland School District. I love that school. I loved high school, going there. I wish we had had our own high school at the time, but we didn't. And what I said is that Profiles in Courage is a great book in that it talks about individuals who can stand up against the forces that hit them from society or the politics or the economics of the moment. And unfortunately, the Lakeland District, I said this to the class, will never fit in as part and parcel of Profiles in Courage because they will not allow a student, 17-year-old individual, coming from the heart, to present a book that means so much to that individual. And I reflect upon that because at your last board meeting, I saw something that really upset me. We have books in the library, for children to read. And it's up to the parents to decide whether the kids can read it or not. If they bring it home and the parent doesn't like it, God bless them. But please don't ever, ever take those books out of that library or restrict what these kids can read. Because the mind of an adolescent or a young person needs to expand beyond the confines of their small environment. That book, Catcher in the Rye, meant more to me when I read that than any other book I'd ever read up to that time. I could relate to that character. I could relate to its angst, his questioning of who you are in the universe, what you are to do in the universe. And I was so disappointed when I was told I could not do my book report on that. So I compliment the Putnam Valley School District for being able to weather the storm and keep those books available. We're not assigning them, these books that may upset some parents, that they may think are inappropriate, and that's fine, and the parents have that right. That's what parents do. That's what they're supposed to do, is to guard their children to what they feel may be the harms of society. But it is not for a library, especially a library, which is the institution that provides every view of the universe possible to any individual who seeks that view. And that's how it should be. So I want to compliment the board, the district. Keep those books there. Continue to do what you're doing. We need to allow our young people to explore. And if the parents are there to guide them, God bless them. That's great, because that's what a parent needs to do. but it is not our job to parent. It is our job to provide a mind-expanding experience for these children so that they understand the universe. The young man, and I don't know your name, sir, the student over there, you said something before about how important the programs, the Spanish and the French Honor Society and those classes are. And they are, because they widen our horizon of the universe. And that's what education does best. It makes us think. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nicole Berglass, Tango Wild Road. Good evening. I'm here tonight to address a popular but yet confoundingly erroneous statement that was made at last month's board meeting. The statement was made by a member of the community who probably thought they were clever. They were not clever at all. The applause they received was inappropriate. They stated that the wearing of this mask is equivalent to the Jews having to wear the Jewish star in Nazi Germany. I, of course, was disgusted by this ridiculously ignorant remark. As the daughter of a family of Holocaust survivors, I was raised knowing what wearing the Jewish star meant. It meant that my grandfather was grabbed from his home onto the street and ultimately sent to Dachau. It meant that my mother, uncle, and grandmother were traumatized and so scared, not knowing if they would ever see him again. It meant that my mother was mercilessly taunted and bullied and shunned by her classmates. The star was so glibly, at last month's meeting, likened to wearing the mask that meant that my mother was not allowed to go to school. This mask that was so glibly and ignorantly likened to wearing the Jewish star meant my grandparents and mother escaped 3 days before the Gestapo raided their home. That Jewish star made it imperative that my grandparents and my mother just barely got on the last boat from Rotterdam. There is nothing in our world that compares to the wearing of the Jewish star. Comparing wearing the mask to the Jewish star in Nazi Germany demonstrate only one's ignorance of history and ultimately disrespects not only the 6 million who perished, but also the survivors and their families. Shame on them for making such a comparison. To the Board of Ed, when that person made this statement, all of you were silent. I get why. You didn't want to respond to them. It is an exercise in futility. However, your silence has no place ever when someone makes such an imbecilic and disrespectful remark. I trust that I just reminded you of what happens when people are silent to such revolting tropes. Silence, especially from those in your positions where your opinions and stances matter, should never be an acceptable response. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello. My name is Keenan Deegan. I live at 43 Dunderberg Road. I just want to thank this board for your commitment to the community and this school district. Your hard work is greatly appreciated by many. I also want to mention the school administration and teachers. You know, teaching in the best of times is a very difficult subject or profession to master. With COVID, it's twice as difficult. I think our teachers should be commended for the work that they do. And I also want to mention Dave Spittle for the work that he's done at the school district. The school has never looked better. He's done a wonderful job. I just want to thank you very much for what you do. Have a happy holiday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Tim Barnes. I live on Northway in Lake Peekskill. I also would definitely like to thank you for all your service. I know you guys have, I've been watching the meetings, and it can't be an easy job. I wanted to just talk a little bit about what my expectations as a parent are, and hopefully this gives you some insight for some of the other people who haven't been coming to the meetings, what we're looking for from Putnam Valley. Some of the things I want my kids to learn is what research is. I did a master's program, I've done 3 actually, so I know research, and I know what's involved with it. And it's not Facebook, and it's not YouTube. And I want my kids to learn what real research is. I want them to find out what reliable sources are, and what isn't, and what the scientific method is, and what facts are, what an opinion is, as opposed to a fact. And I want them to know about the facts of our history, because apparently a lot of people don't want to know the facts of our history. But I wonder what these meetings have been teaching kids, because my kid sometimes sits in and watches these meetings. So there's got to be other ones that do. And I just wonder what we're teaching them about those things I just said, and what's acceptable for research and for facts and for opinions. The last meeting, that was pretty brutal. I literally was like trying to throw on my clothes to come over here. I knew I wouldn't make it in time. But I was so angry, and I was disappointed. Somebody came in talking about their research, and they decided to talk about the DSM-5. They had some pseudoscientific equation of transgenderism with body dysmorphia. And like the woman just mentioned, I was pretty disappointed not to hear any pushback on that from our board. It just went. It just was allowed. And it's funny because this same person was ridiculing science, but then they were trying to somehow use science to make their point. So I guess it's when it's convenient. But here's some of the things. I watched back the board meetings several times. I heard them call transgenderism a mental disease, and there was no pushback, and a mental illness, and a mental disorder. And they compared it to schizophrenia, bipolar, and diabetes, and there was no pushback. And this is an academic institution, is it not? There has to be some pushback when fake science is thrown out in an academic setting. There has to be. No different than what the woman mentioned earlier. There also has to be some pushback because you have a board over there that rule number 7 says making deprecating or disparaging remarks or libelous statements is not accepted. But it was last month. The fact is that when the DSM-5 was rewritten to version 5, they made an explicit decision to take gender dysmorphia and turn it into a diagnosis, not a disorder, for exactly the reasons of that confusion that was created at the meeting last time. It is not a disorder, it is a diagnosis. And there is a difference. A diagnosis is a reason for discomfort. A disorder is a mental illness, as this person was trying to say it is. For a little background, body dysmorphia is a disease. The person's perception of their body is that it's malformed somehow, such as anorexics. And changing their body does not change their opinion. They can get skinnier and skinnier and skinnier. They still think they're overweight. We all know this. That is a mental illness. They can't see their body correctly. Their reality is literally distorted. And so that needs to be addressed. The funny thing is, I have a copy of this, and this is what I grabbed when I was thinking of coming over here. I literally had this in my hand. I was trying to throw some freaking clothes on so I could come over here. Because I was so pissed about somebody who thought they knew what the hell is in here talking about it. So, by the way, nowhere in the section on body dysmorphia are the words gender dysphoria, or transgender. It's nowhere in here. In fact, it's 209 pages later that it gets its own section. So I wanted to set that straight because no one else thought that was important to challenge that. Gender dysphoria, that is not seeing what isn't there. There's no distortion of reality. This is why it's a diagnosis and not a disease. It's quite the opposite. These people know exactly who they are and what body they're in. They have a sense that they feel like their body doesn't match who they are. That's not an illness. So previously, in version 3 and 4, it was a disorder. It was considered an illness. But they made that explicit change to it being a diagnosis so that people would not label it and therefore label people in such a negative way. I mean, when we're here talking, we're talking about students, right? Isn't all this about students? So somebody came in here at this microphone and talked about students having mental illnesses and basically telling them they're sick in the head, and it wasn't challenged by anyone in here. I just couldn't believe it. So I wasn't so mad at that person. Obviously, they're just one of these people who thinks they know what research is. But I wasn't real happy with our board not saying anything. So I can't even imagine, like, what if I were transgender and I was listening to that? I just can't even imagine. I hope no one did, but I just can't imagine how that would have felt for me. Telling people they have a mental illness, a mental disease, again, these phrases, a disorder, because of how they feel, I don't understand, where is the empathy in the Putnam Valley community? And it's not just on that issue. Man, every board meeting, I hear people who have absolutely zero empathy. They have no way of putting themselves in other people's shoes, because I can't imagine saying what that person said without any possible way of looking at myself from outside and saying, Jesus, I could really be hurting some people with what I'm saying. Crazy. Instead, just get accusations. So, I mean, I can't imagine being a person who lives every day of my life thinking that I was supposed to be in a different body. I can't imagine that. Most of us probably can't. But that's part of empathy, realizing you can't and appreciating that. You know, people's feelings are valid. But instead, these people get compared with schizophrenia or having bipolar or diabetes. So I don't feel it's anyone's right to be questioning someone else's feelings, but I do feel like the board has two responsibilities. I think number one, making sure whatever is being discussed here is worthy of an academic setting. Again, I've heard people say they're not into censorship, neither am I. But this is an academic setting, and the conversation should be related to that. And second of all, those conversations, the board should make sure are not deprecating, disparaging, libelous, or hurtful. And that's what I expect. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else?
Stephanie Bale, 44 Hudson View. I wasn't going to say anything tonight, but I have to say this because I don't appreciate hearing here about how they're supposed to censor what the speaker says. I pay taxes here just like everybody else, and I should have the ability to say what I want, how I feel, if we're talking about feelings. And I have to just put this out there. I just Googled it just now from the American Psychiatric Association. and it talks about some people who are transgender will experience gender dysmorphia. So I think you could throw around your evidence, he can throw around his evidence. It's not.
Stephanie, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just need you to address the board, not the other audience members.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I think if the board wants to be spoken to, a couple of people mentioned you being silent. I think everybody needs to stop being silent about the muzzles on our face, what it's doing to our children, and how vaccine mandates do not belong here at all. And if we want to talk about what the Nazis did, that's exactly what the Nazis did. They separated people, first because of little bits and pieces, like, oh, the Jews are sick, let's put them in the ghettos. And then it was the stars. But we have the vaccine cards, and we have the masks. You know, it's so disturbing to me that I sit there and I don't know who's speaking. I don't know who's speaking. It's absurd. I mean, you could look up so much stuff about what the masks do. And they really don't do anything for us medically. I mean, you could read the box of masks where it says made in China and it says not for medical use. Right on the box of those blue ones that people are wearing. I wasn't gonna say anything because, but I can't just sit here and like listen to people calling for censorship again. Thank you. Oh, no applause?
Wow. It's kind of, I just want to say that I feel that the last meeting,
Could
yeah,
you
to
introduce
you.
yourself?
Who are you?
Could you?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mark Weiss, 54 Hiawatha Road,
Thank you.
Putnam Valley, New York. It felt to me when I watched that last meeting that it was hijacked by 4 people who decided to show up and kind of offer very extreme views on stuff. And I was so proud tonight, I won't talk to you, but I want to let you know who spoke, that people stood up to say the things that needed to be said. What just needed to be said needs to be said, that masks are not muzzles. Masks prevent the virus from spreading. 800,000 people have died from COVID, and 750,000 people died in the Civil War. If you want to dispute that, look that up in your Google thing. So we need to have courage to talk to each other and to be kind to each other at the same time, and to deal with these kinds of issues, and to support you. I think you got blindsided, and I don't expect you to be silent anymore. Or however you decide to speak up, that's fine. So I just think it's important for us to make this, whatever it turns out to be, a conversation and a dialogue. Thanks to Sam for having the courage to do what he did. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Hi, I'm Charis Russell. I live on Walnut Road, and I just want to say hi. I'm new to, my son just came this year, and I probably have a differing opinion from a lot of people here, but I'm not a confrontational person. But I just wanted to say, in hearing this, like, I agree with no censorship. I agree that everyone should have a voice, but I do feel, as being in a minority in some of my beliefs, that there is censorship in some ways. So I just want to say that I think we all should be respectful, but like thinking about the books that were talked about last time, I think there's a difference between one of those books that was spoken about and The Catcher in the Rye. Like that book, like we do make judgments. Some of that material seemed pornographic, and I think that to say that there's no judgment and we just put everything out there, I don't know how true that is, because like someone had said at another time, you do make judgments and you don't have certain things and you pick and choose. So just, I don't know, if just we could all be honest and respect each other, but see that maybe some parents maybe don't say things in the best way, or they come across in a bad way. I think at the heart of it, they care about their children, and we all care about our children. But I do see that there seems sometimes to be a double standard on the materials that are allowed or not allowed or provided for. So I just wanted to say that, but thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome to the community.
Anybody else? Okay. I'm sorry.
Good evening. I'm Jennifer Carpenter. I live on Old Oregon Road, Cortland Manor. My daughter's in the 11th grade here. And I just want to say, you know, when we first came to the school district, we came from, she came from private school, and we entered the school district when she was in 5th grade. And I worked down county, and I was concerned about her being so small and leaving her way up here in Putnam, and I'm working so far away, and we were there. Her first day of school, she came home, and she was so excited. And it was the best day that any parent can have. She had Mr. Carlin as her teacher. And the way that he invited her as a new student in the class, I think she was the only new student at that time. And the way she was incorporated into the school community, and from then on, and how she was able to find her way. You know, I've always really appreciated the Putnam School District for being so welcoming. We are raised with Christian values, and one of the things she's left when she leaves home is to treat people the way you would like to be treated. In terms of judgment, we recognize that people have different experiences, and people have different values, but as long as your values do not cross over and infringe on the rights of others, we have to be respectful. And that's the way she's raised. And I have to say that, you know, following suit with those values, and the parents and the students that she's met here, we've had a wonderful experience. I heard a lot about your school board meetings. I've always found myself involved with, actually, I'm retired law enforcement, but I'm part of a lot of different committees and things, and it seems like Thursday nights is always, I got something going on. I'm on another Zoom call or whatever. But I recognize that the outcry from the community really needed a pause, it seemed like, and a voice to bring people together and to stop. We're talking about children. And it's important that we allow them to be able to experience the world in their time, and to be able to learn and not necessarily have to follow suit in how we see things. They engage, their world is very different. As long as we have a relationship where we're constantly in conversation with them, that they are being using good judgment, and that they are being safe. And constant communication allows you to constantly see where they are in their thought processes. But having said all that, I'm just going to simply say that, you know what, I've been very, very satisfied with the Putnam Valley School District, and the high school in particular. The lessons, I will say that I've actually been surprised with the curriculum and some of the books that she's brought home, and the conversations that we've had over the variety, the diversity of the books that she's been exposed to. And I want to say I'm very pleased with it. And I just wanted to be able to come tonight and just say thank you. That's it.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, the board, do you have any comments before we move into topics for upcoming meetings about?
That's after.
Huh?
That's
After? Okay. So, topics for upcoming meetings.
I was ready to jump for the board comments.
I was already for board comments.
So the upcoming meetings, I think we had briefly mentioned, we're now at the budget season. So next board meeting will feature, I forgot, what were they? I opened it up.
Technology.
Technology and operations, and then the following one would be athletics and special education. Those are the next two meetings coming up in January. So we are now in budget season, so most of the presentations will focus on budget-related topics through March. That's it.
Okay. So, comments.
So I have a couple, one from 3 weeks ago, one was our last, but there's one in December, one in November, always throws me off. So whenever it was, I've really been thinking a lot about literature, and Mr. Oliverio, your story is exactly what I was going to talk about today, in that I think good literature is supposed to offer our students windows, doors, and mirrors. Windows and doors into peeks into worlds that are different from theirs, which I think we often do, but equally important, mirrors, so that they see themselves reflected in literature, or that they see someone in their life reflected in literature. And it is if one book speaks to one child in 1 year, that book did its job. And I don't think we can't put our own opinions about certain books on it. We need to make sure, obviously, that there's certain standards of appropriateness and grade level, but we're not making things up. We're following state curriculum, we're following state guidelines in terms of what books, but we want to make sure that our children see mirrors, as well as have those window and door opportunities. And, you know, I happen to not like Catcher in the Rye, Mr. Oliverio, personally, but I do know many friends who said exactly as you said. They were Holden Caulfield. It went over my head. It just wasn't for me, but so many other books were. And I think that is the point of a school library, to have those options to speak to the different people who have good opinions or bad opinions about the same book. So I just wanted to say that.
I just wanted to sort of send a reminder out there. The public comment at the end of the school board meeting is really meant to be a comment and not a public debate. That being said, anybody who's watched any of these board meetings know that is something I'm not necessarily capable of. So I oftentimes engage with speakers, correcting inaccuracies, making sure the story is straight, or sometimes sharing my own personal feelings, which I probably shouldn't be doing either. And then sometimes we make the decision not to respond, because sometimes just responding may actually make things worse. That is oftentimes a tormenting experience, and it's not one that comes without regret. I can promise you there are many board meetings where I leave and go home and perseverate on what I wanted to say or what I should have said, but chose not to for whatever reason. I also want the community to be aware that many of those conversations, although they may not take place in this format because it's not appropriate for them to, does not mean that those conversations are not had in other formats or ways. And oftentimes follow-up happens on an individual basis. So I will continue to stand up for our students. It is my job to stand up for our students. And that's primarily what my goal is. So I will try to do a better job. I will be respectful of everyone. As we shared here, there's lots of opinions, and everyone's allowed to have their own. But I certainly will not stand for judgment and hate and other things of that nature that are being shared at a publicly broadcast meeting. And someone had mentioned, I think Mr. Barnes had mentioned, that his son watches these meetings. Well, I'm oftentimes embarrassed to admit that my two sons oftentimes watch these meetings and are full of commentary when I return back home. In fact, last board meeting, my younger son asked me why I was spending money like a drunken sailor, and then questioned how much money drunken sailors had to spend. So it's just important to know, I really do try my best to correct inaccuracies, to provide any community members the freedom to share their own beliefs, because they're free to share their beliefs. But I do agree that when the line is crossed, that we have to do a better job of redirecting or stopping, because this is not an environment to judge other people's kids. It's not an environment to share hateful messages, and we have to make sure that does not happen any longer. So, thank you.
Okay, just thank you for your comments. It's truly appreciated, and your attendance at these meetings. Thank you.
Right. And Dr. Luft, I know a lot of boards, there's never any talk back. The public comes to the podium, they say their thing, there's a 3-minute timer, the light goes off, the person sits down, and that's it. Because we're a family, we're a community, we're small, we've never operated like that. But it's always been difficult. I've been on the board 12 years. When do you go back and forth? When does it become a private conversation? And when is it appropriate? And also, as somebody who is elected to the board, I have to be careful that I'm representing everybody in our community, and that my opinions are my opinions. But of course, they're going to inform my decisions. And I had a point. I really did. It is difficult when your lives collide, and when I come to these meetings after having facilitated the GSA in my school, where I was in a completely different conversation. And there's a lot I could say, and sometimes it's just easier. And I know that's not good either, but it seems more prudent to not say anything. But I'm always willing to discuss my personal opinions if anybody would like to speak to me at any time. So. But I do, as Mrs. Jeter said, thank you for reminding us how important our role is.
No, Mr. Ferraro? No. Okay. Students, do you have anything to add? Okay. We do.
Go ahead.
No, but we do really want to listen to you and to what you think. So don't ever, hesitate to share your thoughts and ideas, because the reason you're sitting here is because we're all old and you're not. So, and you see things differently sometimes than we do. And it's important that we have your perspective in terms of our decision making. So, please feel free anytime to share. And I won't put you on the spot. Maybe. So.
I recant my not having something to say. Because I'm embarrassed, because a lot of the comments today are 100% correct in putting pauses on incorrect information that's just falsely not correct. And then some of it, at least personally for myself, and this is not a confession of any sort other than a confession of ignorance, I don't know what's in the DSM. So, it's hard for me to kind of put a pause on facts when I don't know what they are. And Now, for sure, I'll definitely look some more stuff up, and not on YouTube. So I apologize for not being more informed on that, and I will, I'll work to be better.
Yeah, and it's nice that members of the community feel like they can come and help us to understand if they have expertise in a certain field, or opinions about certain things, or things that happen to them that have affected them. Because I mean, those are important parts to hear too. So we do thank you for that. Can you go to the microphone though, so that everybody can hear it? Thanks. She has her coat on. She's just almost out the door. He snatched her back.
Okay, so something occurred to me. Okay, we're in a time where mental health, there seems to be a lot more understanding in mental health. And it seems like the kids can also use more understanding in signs and symptoms of mental health, just for their own self, siblings, classmates. Years ago, I took a course here, Mental Health First Aid. And I took it with, I think it was open to parents, but this staff. And then since then, I became an instructor as well. And although I instruct most adults, and it doesn't have to be me, but would you consider having a course for kids to help them understand mental health? And really it's just to identify signs and symptoms. And so it helps to build a level of empathy and compassion and understanding that they may even be able to go home and help family members out and broaden the conversation in terms of how important it is to understand mental health and how that impacts how we talk to each other and how we, what we allow to become so important or to help manage us, manage our day, and allows us to manage ourselves as individuals. So that's all I just wanted to say.
Thank you. Natalie?
Sure. So we actually just recently had a conversation with some of the clinical staff and some of the teachers who loved that course and are talking about bringing that back and opening it up for community members. Earlier today, we met as a committee, a school counseling advisory committee, and I think it's so important that that our message get out there. And one of the things was about communication and how we're communicating about the social and emotional learning opportunities that our students have within the district K-12. And I love your idea actually about teaching, about really taking that course that we did offer and bringing it into the upper grades in high school especially. We have started to really align it. What we've seen coming sort of out of this pandemic is some students, really the pandemic was, they were fine, they were okay, they had, decent, it was hard, but they're okay and resilient. But a lot of our students are struggling, and how do we bring awareness to them, to their peers who can help them and engage with them? So a lot of the things that were just commented on, we are seeing and certainly responding to, but I really love the idea of bringing that course back, not only for our adults, but really to our high school and potentially middle school students. And in our elementary school, our school counselor does a lot of push-in lessons, really just bringing awareness to words like anxiety, stress, frustration, anger, all of those terms just to become familiar with them, and knowing that this is a safe place, school is a safe place, to be able to seek help and to learn. Again, I think moving back to, everybody's back now in school, just moving towards more awareness and more opportunities to learn about ourselves and about others and how we can help others is a great direction.
So Natalie gave a much more articulate answer. Mine was just going to be absolutely.
I just have to say, in listening to all of this, and as a public official and, as a school administrator for a long time in this community, the needs of our students have changed, for sure. And I think that there are a lot of great things and a lot of great opportunities, but responding to those needs, it is our job as a school district to meet students where they are. Whether if they're in pain, if they're happy and they have great experience, enhancing those. If they're in pain, working with them, with their families. If they're struggling academically, we're constantly meeting the needs of our students, and we do see a rather large increase in mental health concerns. There are lots of reasons for that. Again, we're a public community who has to respond to the needs of the very typical child who, during the pandemic when we first shut down, who got to stay home and bake cookies with their family or to go on hikes and walks, to students who literally their families did not have food. So we are a public agency who has to respond to the needs of our students, and that's our job, is to meet students and their families where they are. Not my opinions, not my beliefs, to really respond to who is in front of us. And we can always do better, and we're always striving to do better. And I think that is our goal, always, is to be a community who learns and responds. So, thank you.
Well,
One more.
so for the high school, there's a senior elective, which is called Psychology and Literature, and I'm currently in it. It's a half-year course, and we literally sit there and break down different, we read multiple books. I've read like 3 books already. And we break down mental disorders, and we examine them more than I've ever examined mental disorders in my life. But we also had the opportunity to have the JCK Foundation, which sat with 11th and 12th graders and just broke down how we could cope and different triggers of mental disorders that then we better educate ourselves, and how we could help better ourselves and our peers in helping our friends, our families with their struggles, which I think if anyone is interested, take Psychology and Literature. It's a great class. It's hard, but it informs you so much.
It's only for
only
seniors?
for seniors, yeah.
How about sharing the books with the board members? I'd like to read some.
So the first book we read was Dinner at the Homesick. It's basically about a mother who has an effect on her children, and it's just about that. We watched Silver Linings Playbook, which examines people with bipolar disorder. We just finished watching The Hours and watching people struggle with depression and examine what they do to cope and different symptoms of that. We read The Kite Runner, which we're currently writing a paper on which characters have different mental disorders and how they could get treatment. I think I read another one, but I honestly forget. So they're pretty
Thanks,
good.
Ann.
3 out of 4, so that's not bad. Thank you.
I don't know where in your schedule you find time for all this, but it's
don't.
good to know.
I'm confused myself.
I know, you don't
They
sleep. Okay, any other comments from the board? I'd like a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, and everybody have a nice, safe holiday.
Have a great holiday.